This is The Art Ambassador with your host, Gwenda Joyce. A former gallery owner, Gwenda takes artists through a step-by-step process that moves them past frustration and into comfort, abundance, and creative flow. So now, please welcome the host of The Art Ambassador, Gwenda Joyce.
Hello and welcome to the Art Ambassador radio show. I am your host, Gwenda Joyce, also known as the Art Ambassador, and we are here live on BBM Global Network and iHeartRadio. Welcome to the show, and I am about to introduce my guest today, artist Kelly Leahy Radding. Kelly is from Connecticut, and she is a client of mine. We've been working together for several years to help support her in moving her art career forward. And when I think of Kelly Leahy Radding, I think about the passion that she has for nature, for wildlife, for preserving the environment. And she has such an amazing observational characteristics and abilities in terms of seeing what is happening in the environment and the beautiful animals and wildlife, specifically birds that she's been researching and following for so long. So I'm really pleased to have Kelly Radding here today as my guest. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi, Gwenda. Thank you for having me.
It's so good to talk to you. I'm very excited that I can share not only your art with everyone here, but your passion for the environment. And it shows up in everything you do, Kelly, which has impressed me from day one. And I'd like to start talking today with you about your art and what you focus on in your art, because we know that your passion for the environment is so strong. So tell us about how this relates to you and what you express in your paintings.
So, nature has been a very important part of me from the very beginning. I grew up with the woods in my backyard. I played in the woods and was very comfortable being in an outdoor setting. I had a mom who was a gardener and a bird watcher, so I grew up just involved in all of that. And as I grew older, I was just still more involved in it. I actually had a graphic design career before I got back into painting. And I started back into my painting career with a botanical art program. So from the get-go, when I'm out in nature, I tend to look at all the details. The details find me, the shells, the rocks, the feathers, the birds, as opposed to some of the bigger picture. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. It's just how my nature is and how I see. And so those are the things that fire me up to want to paint. Everywhere I look outside, I see a painting or I see something that, I want to paint that. I want to draw that. Don't forget that. And so I started doing these more very realistic representational pieces, and getting more and more involved in the environmental aspect of all these places I visit and spend time in. And I find things in my backyard.
Yeah, I think as an artist, it's just natural for you and for anyone to be painting and drawing what you see in the world and what fascinates you. And it just sounds true to who you are and the kind of artist you've become. So you said that you were...
It's also kind of what resonates, too.
Yes.
Sorry, what resonates, because people will say, well, can you paint a portrait? I'm like, well, no, that's not what resonates with me. I could do it, but my heart would not be in it.
That's a really good point. And so you were painting botanical paintings, and how is that different from painting maybe fine art paintings?
Well, it's the trick with the botanical painting is the genre has been known as something that you need to capture the scientific accuracy, but with an aesthetic, an artistic aesthetic. So that was kind of how the genre is described and how it's approached. What I've been trying to, and what I've evolved over the past few years, and also with your help, is I felt the need to go beyond just that observational capture, that, the detail. I really feel that I want more of myself and my personal feelings in my art, but while still honoring that detail, because nature is pretty perfect. I don't really need to do too much more to make it better. But I over the past couple of years, and especially working with you, I feel that it needs to become more personal, and I feel that I'm evolving into that with my newer work.
And I love the direction you're going. And can you tell us perhaps what the difference is as you feel like you're really becoming more of a fine artist?
As I'm becoming more and more into this path that I'm starting with, I think I'm letting myself express the feelings that I have for and part of that delves into a little bit of the political aspect and the environmental aspect of it, because it's all so precious to me. And I want people to see it how I see it. I want people to, what's really fun is to see people look at my work and they'll say, well, I've never seen that before. And so that really pleases me, that they see something that could be every day around them, but they don't notice it. And because I'm recording it and I'm painting it and I'm putting some of my feelings of how special these things are for me, when I see that connection with somebody, that they then see it the way I see it, then I think my job is kind of done. And that really thrills me if I help them see the world around them with a different eyes. And I was talking to you earlier. That's one of my new themes: see with new eyes.
Well, I love that. I love that because for me, looking at art is showing me something that I haven't seen before. And at the same time, it allows me to discover what it is in there that the artist is feeling or communicating, and there is something intangible that's going on that gets communicated. And oftentimes it's hard to talk about or write about, but when you see a painting or an image, you just get it. It's intangible, but you get it. And that's really important. That to me is just a very key element and why I enjoy art so much. And I enjoy seeing the different viewpoints that artists have and express to me. That's what makes it unique. So, Kelly, you've been... Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying it's such a visceral thing, to view something, because that's kind of the first thing we do. We see things with our eyes. And, I can just, one of the paintings I'm working on is a hawk. There's hawks flying around us all over the place, but I'm trying to get someone to look at the hawk as such an integral part of our environment, that it's something that you go by every day and see, but it's so important, even though it's just a hawk. It lives, it breathes, it's in the air, and those are the things I'm trying to show with my work now.
Well, I think also once you see a hawk and it's brought up close to you, then when you see it out in nature or in your life somehow, you become more aware and you recognize that hawk may be very silent, but it's an important part of our environment. It's an important part of our world.
Right.
And
That's right.
This brings me to the series of paintings that you've been working on for most of this year so far, and you're kind of in the middle of it. And it's called Earth, Air, Fire, and Water is the overarching theme, and the subtitle is Balancing on the Edge. So tell us about that.
Yes, that's been a fun theme to be working with you. And when I first came up with it was the earth, air, fire, and water. Because to me, that's, and there's many native religions and of all over the world where the world is in balance when earth, air, fire, and water are in balance. And one thing needs the other, and they cannot live independently of one another. So when I started working on that theme, I thought I would come up with a group of paintings. One of the other things that I do is I work in several different mediums. So I thought I'll do a balance of 4 paintings of 4 different mediums. So everything's all balancing, just to show that they all need each other. One individual is part of this whole big picture, and each of the groups will have something in each that will represent earth, air, fire, and water. As I started in on the research and the thumbnails, and it just keeps evolving, and we started talking about some of the work I'm using, or subjects I'm doing are endangered species, some are in endangered habitats, some are everyday backyard birds, or animals or plants, but if we don't do something, they may not be in our backyard. So
Well, that's
you, with
such
your
an
help, you
important,
helped.
Kelly, we're going to take a
Yes.
break and we're going to talk some more
Okay.
about how this series of images under the theme of Earth, Air, Fire, and Water has come to pass. It is still in creation and process. I'm speaking with artist Kelly Radding, and this is the Art Ambassador Radio Show. I'm your host, Gwenda Joyce. We're going to take a short break, and we are back. This is Gwenda Joyce, the host of the Art Ambassador Radio Show, and I'm here today on BBM Global Network with my guest, artist Kelly Leahy Radding. Kelly is telling us about her most recent series of works based on the theme of Earth, Air, Fire, and Water. Tell us about these themes, please, Kelly. How are they showing up in paintings?
So they're working on a group of paintings that I kind of concepted and put together thumbnails. So I'm now working on the pieces themselves, and they're evolving as all things do, from the concept of earth, air, fire, and water being balanced. And unless they're in balance, we don't get the whole universe in balance, our whole environment, ourselves, our inner selves. So these are like an outward expression of that balance. But as I'm working on them and picking the subject matter, so many of these plants, animals, habitats are threatened, endangered, or could be threatened. So part of my goal now is to delve a little bit deeper into it. When I talked about wanting to have more of my own feelings and connections with these subjects come out more, I'm working more towards, with a sense of hope, but also wanting to show that these things are precious, but they could be in peril. They are balancing on an edge, and there are things that we need to do or be aware of to hope that they don't fall off that edge. And that's my goal with this work, is to hopefully have people see it with new eyes, see that coyote in their backyard with new eyes, and understand that it is part of this whole ecosystem. It needs to be there for all these other things to be there. And so I'm pushing myself, with your help, to put a little bit more of that my personal passions and feelings behind it. And I'm really very excited about the direction I'm going with it.
Well, it's really becoming a nice, very strong series. And you mentioned that you work with different media, so your series has the 4 different media that you work in. So tell us about maybe choose one of those media and how the subject matter has evolved, and how you've selected the subjects of a particular subset of these pieces.
So all 4 of the mediums that are going to be represented in the show, they're very similar in their way of working, in that they're water-based, watercolor, egg tempera, casein, and a miche technique, which is oil and egg tempera. But most of the techniques are fairly linear, because the mediums dry so quickly, so you work in a dry brush linear way. So they're very similar in technique, but what changes is how they look. There's luminosity in the egg tempera. There's a little more opacity in the casein. Watercolor, of course, is more luminous just because it's a transparent medium. The miche technique, because it's oil, alkyd, and egg tempera, has more richness in it. So I've chosen the subjects to represent earth, air, and fire and water in each of these mediums, based on how the medium will best show it. If I thought of one that I wanted in the series, and I thought, oh, I want to do that in watercolor, but then thought, oh, but it'll be so much nicer with the rich color that I can get in the miche technique, which is the oil, alkyd, and egg tempera. So I did shift around my subjects based on just what will best show what I want to say with them, with the medium, and also the format. Some are square, some are large and narrow, tall and narrow, some are rectangular. So it's been a really fun design project too, just choosing based on size, shape, and medium.
There are a lot of different techniques and technical decisions that you are making, and you haven't even gotten to the image yet. So you have some specific images, and your purpose is to show these wonderful parts of nature, and in many cases, you're showing that their environments and their habitats are threatened. Give us an example, if you would, of one of those.
One that one that I've completed is Kokia from Hawaii. Kauai in particular. I do a botanical program there through the National Tropical Botanical Gardens. It is an endangered species of hibiscus and only occurs on Kauai. And the specimen that I actually painted is from one of the gardens, and it's this bright orange fire color. So even though it's a plant, it's representing fire. Because it's a glowing candle in the dark forest, and that's how I represented it. And egg tempera is how I chose to depict it because it has that luminous glow to it. So it's depicted as a candle in the darkness, but it's threatened. It is a rare plant, and if we don't preserve the habitats, and unfortunately climate change is one of the things that threatens many species of plants and birds in the Hawaiian Islands. So that's why that one made it into the series.
And that's a beautiful image, and the color is exquisite in your painting, reflecting fire. And there are a number of aspects of fire that keep recurring in your artwork. In the series. Fire is a big one, and Kelly has so many topics and things that you want to paint about. Give us another idea of another one.
Well, so yes, it's funny. I'm going to my board to look at them. So part of what I do is I love to travel, and that's very much a part of my soul and a part of my art as well. So pretty much everything I do is something that I've seen on my travels or just my hiking around my home. One of the paintings in the series is from last year at Muir Woods. And just going through this cathedral of trees and the feeling and the peace and the hope that I got from that forest, I had to paint it. So that is in one of my series. It's the Casein series, tall and thin, of course, these beautiful large trees. But it's also a national monument. Our national monuments are under threat. Maybe not necessarily Muir Woods, but
all of them. We're going to be talking more about the national monuments and the national parks. We're going to take a short break and hear more from Kelly Radding, the artist who has just returned from a big nationwide trip of national parks. This is Gwenda Joyce. I'm the host of the Art Ambassador Radio Show, and we're live on BBM Global Network. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Art Ambassador Radio Show. I'm your host, Gwenda Joyce, on BBM Global Network and iHeartRadio. I'm here today with my guest, Kelly Leahy Radding, an artist whose passion for the environment, for nature, the elements, and wildlife is so apparent in everything she does. Kelly, I am excited to hear about your latest venture, which has been a trip that you just returned from literally hours ago to visit 12 national parks around the United States. So please tell us how this idea came about.
So it was one of those serendipities, just fell in my lap, have to do it, make a quick decision kind of a thing. So I do try to get to as many national parks as I can. Yellowstone is one of my favorite places on the planet, and I can't spend enough time there. I'll be back there in September. But the opportunity came up to drive my niece's car from California back to the East Coast, and she needed help, and I said, I'll do it. So within a couple of weeks, I planned as many parks as I could along a northern route, because I also needed to meet back up with her in Yellowstone to babysit her cats for a couple of days. So I started in San Francisco, meeting you at the Presidio, which is pretty cool because at the time I wasn't quite sure. We didn't even really realize it's a national park. So
I didn't realize
was July
it.
12th.
Mm-hmm. That was the first I knew. I mean, the Presidio is very important to the landscape in the San Francisco Bay Area. It was changed from a military base where there was no access to now it's a national park. And over the last 20 years, it has evolved into a place that there are hikes, there's open space for people to enjoy. There are buildings that used to be military buildings that are now turned into office spaces, and many, many nonprofit organizations are using those office spaces, and it's just become a wonderful environment. So Kelly and I had a chance to meet up there on the first stop of her trip.
Yes. And it was, in my notes, I went back to read my notes because I was keeping them along the road. And I wrote to myself, it was a bubble of quiet and grace is what I wrote about the Presidio amongst that, San Francisco is so busy and vibrant and cars and people and cultures. And there's this little piece of quiet up there on the hills there. It was just wonderful. So we started with you and I meeting there, and then boom, on the road we went. So we went to...
And you were traveling also. You had a traveling companion also to share the driving with you.
Yes, my sister joined me, came out with me to San Francisco and also met with Gwenda. She left in Fargo. I had a friend meet us in Bozeman, and she drove all the way home with us, with me. And I literally got home at about 3 o'clock Eastern time. So we went through, I think, 10 national parks, 2 national monuments, so many national forests, I can't even keep count. I'll have to do my final. National grasslands, national lake shores, scenic byways. I think I was on probably 10 or 12 scenic byways. And just to see the scope of what we have as public lands. I'm so passionate about public lands and that they belong to all of us. And I just wanted to observe and record just what we have out there. Even if people don't ever get the chance to go or see, perhaps they'll see it through my eyes with the work that I can come up with from this trip and past trips and future trips. It's out there. It's vast. It's amazing. The people you meet are amazing. It's you can tell I'm really pumped about it, having just gotten off the road. But each park is in and of itself a wonderful. They're just wonderful, and some are really busy, some are really quiet, some are historical. Some take a lot of miles to get up to where they are, like Voyageurs almost in Canada, in Minnesota. But it's a vast, diverse, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful world out there in the United States.
Well, it is there for all of us, and I'm so happy to have someone like you who has such a sensitivity and appreciation for it to share that experience with us. You were in Voyager National Park. Is there something that you can tell us that was unique, either to being there or to getting there? Because I've never been there.
It was, so first off, it's just so remote. So you drive up there. We stayed in Orr, Minnesota, and it's about a half an hour up the road from Orr, Minnesota. And my first thing is you're not going to see anybody there. And yet there's people just like me, just like my friend who was with me, families with kids. They're in the visitor centers. They're hiking. They're there enjoying it. And that was really, it just is great to see people enjoying it. What it is mostly is water, because it's this huge lake on the border of Minnesota and Canada. And so that was part of one of my unexpected findings of this trip, is especially going in theme with my earth, air, fire, and water. Pretty much every day had an element theme. And if I had to choose my element about Voyageurs, it was predominantly water, and then secondary earth, because it's the beautiful Northwoods that are just mysterious and dark and ethereal and lush. But the major element up there is this large lake, and physically and spiritually, because most everybody who was enjoying it had their boats. They were boating on it, or houseboating, or taking a boat tour around the lake. So that's the cool thing about it. It's a water place.
It's a water place, and for someone who's a native Californian where we frequently have droughts, I really appreciate your sensitivity to water. We're here with Kelly Radding, an artist from the East Coast, from Connecticut. We're going to be talking more with her about her trip to the national parks. This is Gwenda Joyce, your host of the Art Ambassador Radio Show, live on BBM Global Network. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is the Art Ambassador Radio Show. I'm your host, Gwenda Joyce, and I'm here today with Kelly Radding, artist and passionate person who is connected with the environment and issues of the environment. And Kelly has just taken a trip across the United States, visiting many of the national parks we have. And one of the stops was in Idaho. It wasn't actually a national park, but it was on the way to some of the wonderful parks we have. And Kelly made a stop at the World Center for Birds of Prey, which is the home of the Peregrine Fund in Ketchum, Idaho. So Kelly, tell us about this stop there. I know you've been an artist you've drawn and painted many of the birds of prey, so you were probably quite familiar with what you were seeing.
Yes, and it's not in Ketchum, it's in Boise. So
okay.
We had an overnight stop in Boise, and in researching just staying there, I found was not aware of this facility. They are a wonderful organization. The Peregrine Fund is involved in conservation of birds of prey, raptors, not just in the United States, but internationally. And they have programs, I believe, in Belize and Ecuador and Africa, and they are currently involved in the reintroduction of the California condor. They do the breeding program there. So their work is conservation, it's preservation, and education. So it was a great stop. I met wonderful people. I met this wonderful young man called Owen who volunteers. He had a tag that said he's had over 200 hours of volunteer work there. So it made my heart happy to see a young man involved in the same things that are very true, dear to my heart. And I had a wonderful conversation. He was showing one of the kestrels, so that was a nice little bright spot for me on the trip. But also just a wonderful organization and lots of young people, lots of energy, and lots of knowledge. It was started by a man that actually my sister had met many years ago, but knew of through a couple she used to do bird rehab work with, and they knew him. So there's all these, it's that 6 degrees of separation thing. So that was really cool to go there. And previous to going, because they opened it at 10, we went to a conservation area for raptors on the Snake River. So it's not just the national public lands, but there's also people out there very passionate that conserve land for other things. This was a raptor area on the Snake River. That's all conservation protected land.
I know there are many young people who are growing up with a special sensitivity and knowledge and awareness to the parts of our environment. And I think young people really feel that connection because they know that things are in danger. And if they don't participate in becoming the solution and helping to preserve our environment and the natural habitats, then they'll be gone by the ends of their lifetimes. Kelly, as an artist, you saw so many wonderful things, and your trip was a whirlwind over a 2-week period. I don't imagine you had too much time to relax and draw and paint. How did you handle that? What were the impetuses that were going on? Yeah.
Well, it was frustrating because, of course, most artists will understand this. I took some time putting all my supplies together, my beautiful handmade leather-bound watercolor notebook that I was going to sketch in, and my handmade paints because I love artisan things. I had everything all ready to go, and then I hit the ground running, and you got 400 miles to go this day, 300 this day. I'm traveling with my sister. I'm traveling with other people. There was no time to sit and do any of that. So I very quickly had to kind of go, okay, shift gears. This isn't what this is about. What is this about? And, it just came to me that it really was more the experience of being there, meeting the people, seeing, what exists, just observing, just being there, being part of it. And unfortunately, it wasn't the stopping and smelling the roses kind of and taking the time for that type of observation. So that's a little frustrating to me because that's so much how I like to see things. So I tried to say this was like the Baskin and Robbins trip, to get a little flavor of each place and kind of say to myself, well, I'm definitely coming back here. And Theodore Roosevelt National Park is the biggest one that stuck into my head that I have got to go back there. It was just another one. I think I basically said it's about now my second favorite park after Yellowstone.
What did you find to be special about it?
Oh, it was so much, it was more intimate. It had elements of everything. It was the Badlands, but with grass, the prairie grass. The morning we went through, the wind kicked up. Then we were walking along this ridge, and you basically had to lean into the wind, or you'd get knocked over. It was wild. We walked. There had been a recent fire. You could smell fire. You could see the burnt areas. Some random trees burned. But then there'd be sunflowers growing up out of the cinders and the grass. And I'm surrounded by wild horses and a herd of bison and baby horses. It was everything. And, it gave me hope because it was the balance. There was earth, there was air in the wind, there was fire, but there was regrowth and there was water. The horses had to go down to the washes. That's where they had to get their water. It was the perfect little ecosystem in balance. I mean, it was everything I was looking for, and then some. So it was a pretty magical place.
That sounds wonderful, and it's named after our president from over 100 years ago, Theodore Roosevelt, who was the original outdoorsman at a time when we had really different interests and concerns about the land. But I think Roosevelt's living there and working on the land was really formative and important to him in his appreciation for our country and for preserving our open spaces and keeping parts of this nation untouched from development and just available for people. Did you feel any of that camaraderie at all when you were there?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Because I always go into a visitor center to read on the boards and just to get more familiar to what, and I knew a little bit about that, and I certainly know the history of Theodore Roosevelt and the birth of conservation in this country, because he was it. And it was that park and being on the ranch there that changed his whole. It was a sea change for him. And there you would read on the board and read the history that he thought of himself this four-eyed, studious little man from the East Coast. And here I am from the East Coast, came out to this ranch land to work, and it changed him. It changed him forever. The big open spaces, the bison, and therein was the birth of the conservation movement in our country, right there. Oh. And with him wanting to preserve land.
This kind of experience can be life-changing, and we're going to be talking with Kelly Radding more about her trip across the country, visiting national parks in the United States. Right now, we'll take a short break. I'm Gwenda Joyce, the host of the Art Ambassador Radio Show on BBM Global Network, and I'm the author of 9 Steps to Artistic Freedom, Living the Artist's Life and Making It Sustainable. Stay with us. We'll be Welcome back to the Art Ambassador Radio Show. I'm your host, Gwenda Joyce, on BBM Global Network. I'm here with Kelly Radding, who is an artist with a passion for nature and the environment. And Kelly, I'm so excited to be hearing about your trip across the country from California back to Connecticut, visiting national parks. So after you left the Theodore Roosevelt National Park, you continued to head east, and tell us where you stopped next.
So from Theodore Roosevelt, we had a night stop over in Fargo, but my goal at that point was Voyageurs National Park up in upper Minnesota on the Canada border. And that was kind of an interesting segment of the trip, because that was where you shifted from the big, wide open western spaces and over into the vast thick, dark, deep northwoods of our country, the eastern part of the country. Some of the cool things on the trip across is all of a sudden we see a sign. We're on this very tiny little back roads. If anybody's ever been up in these back roads in Minnesota, there's nobody on the road. You can go forever. And I see this little sign, and it says the Mississippi River. And I went, we have to back up and see that. Is that the Mississippi River? And my friend said, well, they can't have called anything else the Mississippi River. So unbeknownst to us, we just kind of wandered across, actually above what they consider the headwaters of the Mississippi River, and there we were at the Mississippi River. So there was another element connection. It was rivers, and there we crossed over the mightiest river in our country. We crossed the Missouri. We crossed the Hudson today. We were the Susquehanna today. So it's just all these wonderful connections and themes just running through the whole trip. And then, of course, as earlier we talked about Voyageurs, the element that's the strongest up there is this beautiful, wonderful lake, and the loons calling, and there's white pelicans on the lake. So that was kind of the shift from the western part of the country to the eastern part of the country. Temperatures more like what I'm used to here on the East Coast. It was a little more humid, not so open, and so it was this kind of just a big shift. So that was fun.
I think when you drive across the country, you do realize certainly how vast and large it is and how different each region is, but you do also feel in your body, you physically get the difference between the West and the East and the area in the Midwest that connects those two regions. As you were driving along, can you tell us maybe of one or two images that you think will turn into paintings? You're an artist with a particular vision. I'm sure you saw things on the road that were captivating you. Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah. Well, so I think the biggest theme that kind of kept following me was that of fire, and of fire not as a destructive thing, but as a chance for regrowth and rebirth. We started with Crater Lake. It's a dormant volcano with this big, beautiful lake, bluest thing blue you've ever seen, especially as an artist. You're going, oh my God, that shade of blue is unbelievable. We also went to Lassen Volcanic National Park in California, which was unbelievable. One side, you're almost in a moonscape, and then you're in a more traditional mountainscape. I would highly recommend that to anybody on the West Coast to visit if they haven't. So fire just kept coming along. Yellowstone, of course, geysers and the pools. We found out a couple of days later after we drove through Grand Teton that a lava fissure opened up in the Tetons. So it was following us. And then, of course, we get to Theodore Roosevelt, and there had been a recent burn. And we saw fires in the mountains. One of the images I just remember, it was just this burnt tree, and there were sunflowers growing out of it. Just gorgeous green growth and beautiful, happy sunflower faces, and so it just, fire you think of as such a destructive, and yes it is, but it's also spiritually a cleansing thing and a chance for rebirth and regrowth. So there's a lot of fire elements that I think are kind of getting stuck in my head. The other thing is, along with the rebirth, is there was this time of year, there was baby animals everywhere. Baby birds, baby peregrine, baby golden eagle, baby bison, baby horses. So again, that whole thing of all things renew, all things cycle through, and to me, that's just to hang on to that and say, yes, all things renew. And
nature
whether
is
we
really
are involved in it or not, it renews.
Nature is a great teacher. There are many lessons we can learn by following the precepts of nature, and nature is ultimate when it comes to rebirth and renewal. You had a couple of more experiences that reminded you of that you were telling me about. Can you share with our audience the idea of the renewal and rebirth?
The renewal and rebirth. It's as you're kind of going along. This is one of my first. I usually go to Yellowstone in the mountains in the fall because my husband likes to fly fish, and Yellowstone Park, the rivers are a little too much full of runoff. But to to go through at this time of year, there were flowers everywhere, and wildflowers. Just everywhere you looked were wildflowers, and you just understand they have such a short period to grow, and yet there they are, and they were so profusely abundant. And it just gives you hope, because by the time I'm there in September in 2 more months, they're all gone, but they'll be back next year. And things, images of tenacity. In Lassen National Park, one of their pins, because I collect the park pins, they have a pika. A pika is a small little rodent that has to have high elevation, cold temperatures. They do not hibernate, but they put their food into their little caves in the high tumbly rocks above alpine. And many parks, I believe there's one in California, I'm not quite sure where, they have not seen one in several years. They've been monitoring them because of climate change. Their numbers are getting reduced. They're disappearing from their traditional habitats. We're going over the Beartooth Pass in Montana, and we're going through all these beautiful rock scree, almost subalpine, alpine, and I step out to take pictures of these profuse wildflowers. We look down on the rocks, and there's little things scrabbling on the rocks, and there's pikas. So it's like, okay, they're here. They're still here. They're still somewhere. And again, that just fuels you to kind of go, if we don't do something, they're just not going to have another place. And they're just the most unbelievably cute little rabbity thing you've ever seen. So all of these kinds of rebirth images and things, plants growing out of the crusty stuff next to a geyser in Yellowstone, the most inhospitable ground you could think of, and yet there's a plant. So those are the images that are just kind of burned into my brain, and I know they'll come out in some way, shape, or form in the next few months.
Oh, I'm looking forward to seeing the paintings that come out of this trip that has inspired you so much. We're going to talk more with Kelly Radding about her trip across the country visiting national parks when we come back after a short break. I'm Gwenda Joyce, your host of the Art Ambassador radio show on BBM Global Network. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Art Ambassador Radio Show. I'm your host, Gwenda Joyce, and we're on BBM Global Network. Today we've been talking with Kelly Leahy Radding, an artist who is a wonderful artist and passionate about her subject matter. Earth, air, fire, and water are the elements that she's focusing on, taken from images of the environment and from nature. Kelly has just finished a whirlwind tour going across the United States, visiting along the northern route some of our major national parks, and she has posted images from her trip on her Instagram feed at Kelly Leahy Radding. Kelly, I'd like to welcome you back, and this trip has been so successful for you. I think there are some ways, I know you just keep being reminded that this trip was really formative for you, really important, and just was meant to be. Can you share a little bit about that with us?
Yeah, it's, from obviously I paint nature. My inspiration is from nature. So one of the things I try to say is, okay, pay attention to nature when nature presents it to yourself and to me. And it started at the very beginning. The second day after I met with you, I'm in the Redwood Forest going through that beautiful drive in Redwood National Park. And there weren't that many people around, and we had met a group of ravens with fledglings. We leave to go. We're heading off we ended up at the Crescent City by the beach, but we had a raven just dive bombing the car. I'm driving, and it just kept flying down the road right in front of my car. And then it would perch, and I would stop. It would come down again, and it kept flying along the road in front of me. So to me, it was kind of like, okay, this is the beginning of my journey. The raven is kind of leading me out to whatever it is I'm going to see. And then at Theodore Roosevelt, I was watching the horses, and I had a rabbit I didn't see it. It almost ran over my feet. My companions were like, oh my God, that rabbit just ran over almost your feet. It stopped to eat right in front of us, looking at me, eating, looking, just very unconcerned. It was probably 2 feet away from me. And a group of people drove up to look at the horses, and the rabbit ran away as soon as they all jumped out of the car. When I read up about what the native people think of rabbit totems and rabbit spirits, it's about rebirth and renewal and procreation and life. And so it's just all these signs that just kept showing themselves to me. And So it made me very happy that I did the trip. It was the universe spinning on a very serendipitous course for me, and just reminding us that it's all precious. All of us are unique, and it's all worth saving.
I'm so reminded of it too, and I can just feel your connection with everything that you've seen and how you allow nature and your passion for life and renewal to guide you to do things like take the trip and be inspired by what you see. And I am very excited to see your paintings. The series of paintings in the series of Earth, Air, Fire, and Water Balancing on the Edge are going to be shown next year in April and May 2019 at the Tides organization, which is located in the Presidio National Park. A perfect and, again, serendipitous location for Kelly's work to be shown. She's going to have the series of paintings on the 4 elements and also incorporating her different mediums that she uses. And what are those media again? You've
egg
got
tempera,
watercolor,
dry brush watercolor, casein, and miche technique, which is a combination of alkyd oil paints and egg tempera.
Well, it's just been a great thrill, Kelly, to have you on the show today. And if anyone wants to know more about your work, you can find it on Kelly's website, kellyleahyradding.com. My name is Gwenda Joyce. You can find information about me at artambassador.net. And if you have interest in knowing about Kelly's show when it comes up next year, please message me at gwenda@artambassador.net. I am the host of the Art Ambassador Radio Show live on BBM Global Network and iHeartRadio. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you next week.